there. This is Lisa from Lisa Arts, and we're going to do a watercolor today. First of all, you will want to gather all kinds of materials together. We want a cup of water, and if you don't have a nice cup like this, it's sort of, if I could tip it, it's the shape of a flower pot. Um, it's made by Faber-Castell, and it's collapsible, like the collapsible water bowls for dogs. I like to use the sour cream containers, something about that size, because you want enough water in it to keep it stable so it won't tip when you have brushes in it, and not breakable, not glass or anything, something plastic. So if you don't have one of these, then that will work well. You want a set of watercolors. I like to use Prang because they are the closest to the professional watercolors in tubes. They're semi-moist, so if I put my finger in here, I could probably indent and put a fingerprint in. They don't dry hard like some watercolor sets. It's hard to get a lot of pigment out of those. And we only need the 8 colors. I know there's sets with more, but that will just be confusing. It's best in the beginning to learn to mix your own colors so that you'll really understand them. This, by the way, is a mixing tray. If it's old like mine and messy and hasn't been cleaned properly, it might be good to use another mixing tray, which I'll use today. You need some brushes, a medium one and a small one. Medium, if you're not sure, could be sizes 6 through 8, and small sizes 0 through 2. Probably a 1 or a 2. Smaller than that might be unnecessarily small. Then you need watercolor paper, which, by the way, before we go there, I did skip paper towels, and I've already torn off a bunch. It's great to have them ready. So when I tell my class that we're going to watercolor, we set the table for watercolor. And by that, I mean have your paper towels handy. You may want to put your napkins in your lap. That's where they disappeared to, so that they're easy to grab. Don't put them underneath your set or under your water, so that when you need them in a hurry and you pull, you spill something. Then you want everything where you can reach it. And if I need to reach everything here, I will put it on the right. So my cup of water is on the right. My brushes and my mixing tray are all on the right. If you're left-handed, it goes on the left. Then what goes in the middle, instead of a plate, is your watercolor paper. I like a nice brand of watercolor paper. This is Strathmore's 300 series. It's pretty good. And watercolor paper is made of what they call 100% rag. It might say acid-free. Basically, what it is made of cotton. So if you've ever painted on the wrong kind of paper, it stretches out and bubbles and gets all warped and crazy. And this watercolor paper will absorb and have bumps to hold the paint. We'll talk about that as we go. But I tape it to a board. You can use a drawing board. I use the back of a sketchbook pad. That way I can turn it around, tip it, and use gravity to make my watercolor go where I want it to. And then I tape it around the edge with masking tape, and I make a nice even border around the edge so that when I peel it off, it looks like it's framed. So now I have everything ready to go, and you can pause this with the list up here and go gather all your materials. And then when you're ready to start, unpause the video. Now, the first thing we're going to do is with a pencil, which I did not put on the list, but we need a pencil. We are going to determine where the middle of our paper is. And we're just going to hold our finger there. If you need to run and get a pencil, pause the video again. And I'm going to draw some mountains above my finger. I'm drawing them very light. I always say in watercolor, you want to draw so light only you can see it. Somewhere down below, I'm making a little squiggle that's going to be a river. That's all I'm going to draw because it's not so great in watercolor to have all these lines that are going to show up. Do you see my squiggle going down the paper and my mountains? I want to draw so light only I can see it. You can hold the paper, the pencil as firmly as you want. You're holding it, it's not holding you. Now I'm going to show you a couple of ways to watercolor. In the first way, we are going to mix the watercolors in the mixing tray. If you notice, I'm putting water into a hole blob by blob into a section. The brush picks up the water from the cup like a mop, but I don't want to squeeze out with my fingers. I squeeze it out by putting the metal on the side and then rubbing it along, and you can see the little blob, the little droplet of water run down in there. It only takes about 6, 8, 10 at the most blobs of water to fill up the section. Now I'm going to go for blue. Blue is right next to the green. The pigments in here are not watercolors themselves. We shouldn't paint directly from here. It becomes paint when I mix it with watercolor. Just like oil paint becomes oil paint when it's mixed with oil. In the tube is what's called pigment with just enough oil to squeeze it out. Now the first way of painting that I am going to do is called an even wash. I'm going to tilt my board up for this and go right across the top evenly. One stroke. I can tip it to make sure that one stroke went all the way across. And the other reason I'm tipping it is you will see at the bottom of this place where I've put paint. Do you see that little bead of paint and water that's running along the bottom? That is actually called the bead. And it keeps the bottom edge wet so that there's no line there when I stop and then go get more. This is called an even wash, where we're just putting on the paint evenly. Now I've dipped into water, and with each brush full, a brush full of water is mixing with the paint that's in the bead, and so it is getting progressively lighter and lighter, and that's a fading wash. Now, if there's something you don't like on your picture, like maybe you got a splash from the person next to you, you can just re-wet it with clear water. Don't scrub too hard, and then take one of your handy paper towels and wipe it away. I could see a little bit of a ghost of that blue still there, but not enough that it's going to bother me if I want to paint over. This is the other reason we have a great big cup of water. You can always get clean water out of here because the dirty pigment or anything that comes off the brush and is muddy will sink all the way down to the bottom. And unless I stir it up, I can always get clean water from the top. That's why I like a big container, like the sour cream container. Also, I think you noticed when I was doing the demonstration of an even wash that the paint won't go anywhere on the paper that's dry. It only wants to flow into the other wet areas. So what I'm doing here very, very quickly is I'm getting everything above that line of mountains. If I call it a mountain line, it sounds like a big cat. But I'm getting it all wet until it's wet like a puddle. And you can see if you hold it up eye level, you can see where it's shiny and where it's not. Remember to do this quickly because the water is drying out or evaporating as fast as we're putting it down. This time we are going to dip right into the paint, like I said not to before, because it's going to mix with the water on the paper, and this is kind of fun. See, I can make all kinds of splotches. Make sure in watercolor that if you want something white, you're going to leave it the white of the paper. So don't paint along with me. Just watch for a second. I'm going to do a really cool sky, and then you're going to do a cool sky. I added a little purple there. I'm going to add some red. I can add some orange. Be careful that it doesn't touch the blue or it'll make brown. So put red in between, because then it goes orange, red, purple. But I'm giving it some interesting, you can even put yellow in, some interesting colors. But don't let your yellow and blue mix, because that will make green, and that doesn't belong in the sky at all. So I'm mixing it around. I want to get rid of that little spot there. I'm letting it flow. And then I'm going to crumple up one of my paper towels. Fancy artists use sea sponges, but then you always have the same sponge. I just crumple up a paper towel and I make twisty marks in here to make clouds. You can come back and darken or lighten anything you want up there. But basically, that's your sky. So now you can pause this lesson and paint your own sky. Unpause when you're ready to watch the next part. And don't rub too hard or you will get the paper pulp coming up. So now the next thing, after you've unpaused, is this river down here. What's the color of water? Well, it's clear and it acts like a mirror. So I can put some of the colors of what I saw up above into this river. So if I put a little bit of red, make sure it's not too much, or a little bit of purple. Purple looks very dark in your set, or any of the other colors. And you can make your river get wider as it comes down here to the front. And you can even take your crumply up paper towel and have some cloud reflections in it. That's kind of cool. And now we're going to wait for this to dry. If you have to, we can pause the video for a little bit and wait for your picture to dry, but also yours will be drying while you're watching me paint. So that always works out nicely. The next thing we're going to paint is some mountains. I already had a little bit of blue mixed up here. Let me move it into the picture a little bit more. I'm going to add a bit of purple. When we were driving in the mountains, my daughter said they do look like tissue paper, layers of tissue paper. The ones that are farthest away seem very, very light. So we can paint some very light mountains in the distance. Can add a little more color to them. Maybe they're getting greener as they come more forward, sort of a blue-green. Always paint end to end. These mountains didn't end right where the paper is. They go all the way out into the world somewhere. All the way around the horizon. Here we go. So now I have some mountains and a river and a sky. And now this green that comes in the set, it's not really the green of anything in nature. It's sort of a tropical blue-green color. Maybe if we were painting a palm tree or something, it might work. So I always add something to it. Add some yellow to it to make it more of a grass green for now. And add water to that because we're going to need a lot of it to fill in our whole land down below. And I think I'm going to add a little more pigment so it's not too light. I'm dipping into the pigment the same as the water. I dip in and then I wipe it on the side, stir it, and then wipe it on the side, because otherwise if I dip in and pull out, I'm taking the paint out and then just dirtying my paint set. Now I'm going to leave a little space between the mountains and the grass because that's drying. And we're going to have something else here anyway. But I'm going to do the even wash method of coming right up to the side of my river with a tilted board. If I have too much here, I could go out and back. And if I have too much, I can do that too, where it's dripping down. We're going to put some flowers and some grasses close to the river when we get there. If you notice, I'm doing one side of the river and then the other, which just makes sense because I don't have to skip over, and I can treat them like two different shapes here. I'm going to dry the bottom edge of my mountains. And you see why I had to mix up a lot of grass? Because I am going to need to do this, almost this whole board with grass. This is such a pink river. I may go back and add some blue, but I sort of like it. Maybe what I should do is add more pink clouds up in the sky. It's awfully pretty to have this river coming through, glowing. Now we're going to wait for things to dry. So you can pause your video, and I am going to do what I said and add a little more pink to my clouds in the sky to match the pink in the river. Paint your grass. Remember to mix up enough ahead of time because it's sort of difficult to come back and try and mix something right in the middle, and then you'll get something drying, and then that's when you get the transparent lines that you kind of don't want. Now I'm going to mix up a color that I like to call mud. I'm going to start with this green because it's already there, but I'm going to add brown to it. And mud is not mud because of the color. Mud is mud because of how thick it's going to get. If I mix the green and the brown, I get a beautiful pine tree color. But I want it thick like mud because I'm not adding any more water to it. So when you're stirring it, you'll feel like, ooh, that's thick. You can even put a drop of black in. In watercolor, you can use black to darken colors, but be careful how much, or it will turn it black. And when you have a whole bunch of thick mud, then I want you to turn your board sideways and zigzag with just the point. I have to show you this. I'm going to put down my brush. When my daughter is dancing ballet, she dances on the point of her toe like this. If she were stomping along, she would be walking like this. Do you see how it's like a leg and then a foot? We don't want that. We want the ballerina up on her toe. And when you have that, you can paint with just the point of your brush and get the skinniest little line. So keep your ballerina up on her toe, and you can zigzag to make a pine forest, or what looks like a pine forest, in the distance between your grass and your mountains, where you just sort of see the points. At the bottom, we can make it a little more solid if we don't want it to be so pointy. But at the top, we want lots of points, like the zigzag of trees that get littler and littler if they're far away. We have little tiny, 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 tiny trees. And they got so little and distant. But if they were close to us, they might be tall. Like that. And so they're all different heights, and it starts to look like, wow, that really does look like some little zigzaggy pine forest. Turn my paper the other way because I can zigzag either way. And I'm going to come up along the side of the river here with some little trees, as though it's coming out of between the forest here. And make sure I'm making lots of points going up into the area where the mountains are. And down here it can be a little more solid. Okay, so that's our distant trees. If you want to make a tree that's close to us, maybe it's sitting on somewhere between the river and those trees, make your mud even darker, a little more brown, a little more black, because we have to have it solid, not see-through. And you can make, I'm looking for where it's driest, a trunk going up into the sky. And from this trunk, you can zigzag out. It's okay if you miss a few branches. Pine trees are very sort of irregular looking. They have branches coming out all over. So there you go. Maybe we would want to put another one somewhere. Maybe just right here. Can't have just one tree having all the fun. Here we go. Okay, a couple of bigger pine trees. Now, one thing we've been doing as we use the point of our brush is we're making kind of little points that read as my brushstroke is a branch of a tree. My brushstroke is a tree. My brushstroke is a piece of grass. So it's good to get another piece of paper or the back of your drawing board or something and just practice. I'm practicing with paint, but you can practice with water. And this is a little flicking stroke. Flick, flick. I did it with paint so that you could see it better, but you can just do it with water. By the way, if you ever are getting behind, just pause and then come back. So I want a place where the grass or the brush lands that's thicker, and I want a place where the brush flicks off. Oh, that was a mess. That's pointier. So that's why we practice, because it's not easy to do. If it's easier for you to do it sideways, then turn your board and do it sideways. If it's easier to do it with it tilted, then tilt your board and do it tilted. But practice until you get good at it. One stroke, one end of your stroke is going to be thicker and one is going to be pointier. We want to have that because I am going to mix up a little bit of yellow. Maybe I'll put a dab of green in just so it's yellowy green. And if you noticed, I'm using my teeny tiny brush. So along the banks of the river, maybe not back here, but maybe here where it's close, I'm going to give myself a few strokes of grass coming up that are longer, like the reeds along the side of the river. The ones on the other bank, they might be shorter. As they go on, they might get smaller and smaller because they'll be out of view. Don't make them all evenly spaced. They can grow in clumps. There might be tall grasses over here that we want to see. But just put in as many as you want. This stroke is good for something else too. If you want to, you can take the little black paint, add a little water to it so that it flows. And up in the sky, you can go flick, flick, and make a bird. Make sure you're doing this with a tiny brush and with a little practice. Make 3 birds, make 5 birds, make some with their wings together and some with their wings more spread apart. Make it an uneven number. Our eyes like to see uneven numbers. Now on the side of the river, you can take your mud color from the pine tree and just stamp, stamp, stamp here and there on the top of some of your tall grasses, and they will look like they're cattails. I was just using the brush like a stamp, using the side of it gently. Now if I use it and push it down so it spreads out, then it can look like a flower, which I can put on some of these. You add to your picture whatever you would like. And remember, if something happens that you didn't really want, like that flower is going down into the grass, you can take your paper towel, wipe it off, let it dry, and then you can repaint it. And it will be fine. Okay, when you're all done and you have painted everything you wanted to paint and you have cleaned up and washed your brushes gently and put your paint away, and by this time your painting is dry, then you can peel the tape. If you are peeling the tape, never just pull it straight down. Pull it out to the side. Sometimes there's a bit of moisture in this paper, and that bit of moisture grabs a hold and it tears your whole painting. If I pull it out to the side, even if there is a little tearing, it'll happen in this white border and nobody will see it, which isn't going to happen anyway because we're doing this perfectly. And when you're done pulling this tape, it looks like there's a frame around your picture already, and it's gorgeous. And thank you for watercoloring with me today. I hope you learned a lot about watercolor. I have to go wash my brushes now. If you want to hear about more classes, go to lisarts.com, lisarts.com,